Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so our second lesson, second economic lesson is going to be on really like the different types of economies that are out there and how society, at the societal level, countries kind of allocate their resources. And that really all depends on the type of economic system that the country chooses to have. So there's a couple of different types of economic systems. So we're going to go through those different types of economies today, talk about them. A lot of times during this video, I'm going to ask you guys to pause and kind of think and try and jot down your ideas. So please, when I do ask you to pause the video because I think instead of me just giving you a lot of these answers and analysis, you have to think a little bit along with the video in order for it to work properly. So what we're going to start with is taking a look. Just first, I want you guys to take a look at this picture here. So you guys have all been to various different stores. So I'm just showing you guys shoes. And you've gone to a shoe store before, or a clothing store, and you see just like rack after rack after rack of different shoes, different shirts, different pocketbooks. Now, the first question you have to ask yourself is, like, why does a store like this exist? Why are there so many different types of shoes? Okay. Now, it's a question you probably have never really asked yourself. You just kind of like take it for granted because it's the system that you're used to. Now, when you think about it, right, shoes for the most part have the same function, right? The shoes are there to cushion your feet, protect your feet, get you from point A to point B. That's really the purpose of shoes. Now, you have different types of shoes, right? Shoes that are maybe designed for running, shoes that are designed for hiking, like different functions to the shoe. But let's just take, for example, like all like your basic athletic shoes, right? If you look here, look at the variety you have of these athletic shoes, right? All these different various colors, all these different styles, right? They're all kind of basically doing the same thing. So the first question I ask to you guys is, like, why? Why does so many different styles, so many different varieties of basically the same type of athletic shoe, why does it exist? Now, think about that. And really the answer to that is it has to do with the type of economy in which we live. If we lived in a different type of economy, you would not have this variety of shoes that you see here. It just wouldn't, they wouldn't be allocating their resources in this fashion. Okay, so that's the first thing just to kind of understand here. We grow up in a certain type of economic system, and so it's what we're used to. And it's what we kind of take for granted that this is the way that an economy functions and it runs. But that's not always the case in a lot of other countries. So every society has to answer some pretty basic economic questions. So I want you guys again to think, what are some of the basic economic questions? What do societies have to decide when it comes to their resources, their land, their limited resources that they can use to produce different things? What are the questions that they have to ask and have answered? So the three big questions that they have to ask or answer as a society is, what goods and services are we going to produce? Basically, what are we going to allocate our limited resources towards producing? We only have a limited amount of money, we only have a limited amount of, let's say it's iron or coal or oil to produce certain things. How are we going to utilize these resources that we've been given as a country? So what goods and services are we going to produce? How much of these goods and services are we going to make? And who will receive the goods and services once they are produced? Are we going to kind of allow it to be bought and sold? Are we going to allocate it for certain types of people? And like, who's going to make this decision about how much is produced and how little is produced, right? So again, these might seem like simple questions because we don't often think about them. We kind of just take it for granted that it works the way it works in our country, but it doesn't always work that way in a lot of other places in the world. And so you might like the way it's done here. You might not like the way it's done here. So that's kind of like the conversation we're going to try and have as a class a little bit. So we're going to go through the different types of economies and take a look at like how this question is answered in various different societies in the world. So the first one is the demand economy or the free market economy. So that is modeled mostly after, our country is modeled mostly after the demand and free market economy. Although we're going to learn that our economy is what we would call a mixed economy, American economy. We're closer, I guess, in a lot of ways to the demand free market economic system, which you might know more as capitalism or pure capitalism. So the concept of capitalism was created, or not created, but kind of like written about and theorized about by a man named Adam Smith. And so he wrote this book called The Wealth of Nations, which kind of lays out the whole principles of capitalism and how it works. And so essentially, when you look at those big economic questions that we looked at, like what goods and services will be produced, how much of those goods and services will be produced, and who will receive the goods and services produced, how is that question answered in our country? Ultimately, that question is answered by the demand of the consumer, the demand of the people in the society, right? What are things that are what's going to be produced? Well, what's going to be produced is what the people desire, right? Because if the people don't desire it, you as a business person can't sell that product, and therefore you're no longer going to make it because you're trying to make a profit, right? So it's all dictated by the needs and desires of the people, of the consumer, right? So let's say, for example, like, you guys know I like to wear, different ties to work. Let's say I like, purple polka dotted ties. And I'm like, these are beautiful. I'm going to open up a store with purple polka dotted ties, and I'm going to wear it, and I'm going to sell these ties to, to the world, right? I might think it's a great idea. I might love them. But essentially, if nobody wants to buy it, I'm going to go out of business. Either I meet the demands of the people, either I change what I'm creating, or essentially my business is going to fail, right? How much of that do I produce? Well, that's also dictated by the demand, right? If people want more of it, then I'll make more of that product. If people don't want more of it, then I won't make more of that product. And so like things got very technological in our age. So like in like all the big stores, like when you scan your barcode, that kind of like is sent into like a central system, let's say in like one of these big supermarkets or one of these big places. And that's how they figure out like how to stock their shelves and how to reorder supplies. And so like that's kind of like how they do it in the modern world. But like this is kind of how a demand economy works. They'll produce exactly what's wanted, or like try to produce exactly what's wanted, and they'll also try to produce the quantity that's wanted by people. And basically it's done for whoever can afford to buy these different products, right? And we kind of, again, intuitively kind of think that way. They're like, well, I could buy it if I have enough money to buy it. If I don't have enough money, then I can't afford to buy it. And so like that's kind of how the demand economy works. So it's called a demand economy because really it's kind of like dictated by the people and the citizens that, kind of demand what they want, and then essentially business owners kind of make that or produce that. So let's talk a little bit about what are the positives and negatives of a demand style economy. So here's where I want you guys to pause the video, and please do pause it. And what I want you guys to do is try and brainstorm. What are good things about our system? What are bad things about our system? Okay, so hopefully you took my advice, you paused the video, and you tried to come up with some good and bad things about our economic system, a demand style economic system. So I'm just going to give you like some of the big highlights. I'm not going to go through an exhaustive list. But when you think about some of the positives of a demand style economy is that, well, you're meeting the desires of the people. So therefore the people have a large say in the direction of the economy and what's produced in the economy. And they can have a big influence over what is bought and sold in the economy. So like, for example, a good example of this would be, let's say, like different styles of clothing. So let's say, for example, a lot of people today like to wear those ripped style of jeans. Let's say 10 years ago that wasn't in style, so therefore people weren't producing that. But now people want it, and so like the producers have realized that, and they could sell it, and so therefore they start to produce it. And so like demand style economies are very adaptive. They will meet the needs of the people, and so essentially a lot of the people's desires are met. So it's very, I guess, consumer friendly. The other thing I would put down about a big positive about it is that it does allow for a lot of consumer products to be created. And a consumer product is something that's like, not necessarily an essential. We're not talking about like potentially like housing and like just kind of like basic necessities. We're talking about things that people desire, and so it allocates for that because people do have desires. So it meets that need. Now, a big negative of a demand economy might be that, that essentially you could be very wasteful in a demand economy, right? The people might desire like all these different styles, but like you're allocating your resources towards producing like 15 different styles of sneakers, and you don't really need 15 styles of sneakers. You only need one. You only need one pair of shoes. So essentially, it could be very wasteful if you have limited resources as a society. It could be harmful to the environment. It could kind of lead to all kinds of other potential problems within the society. So you want to think about those different things and add to your list. You want to try and have at least like 5 positives, 5 negatives for a demand style economy. All right, command style economy. So the next big economy is called command style. So this is the opposite. Command, right? A command comes from the top down. So you want to think of this as in command economies, it's not the answers to all these questions here, these big questions, they're answered by really the government. So the government decides what goods and services will be produced. They decide how much of those goods and services will be produced, and they decide who gets those goods and services. So the answer to that question is the government makes these decisions in a command economy. So some famous command economies in history. So probably the most famous one is the Soviet Union, all the way from the era of like Lenin and Stalin, all the way through to the end of the collapse of the Soviet Union. But also, it's not just communist countries that could be command economies. Also, fascist countries are command economies, like Mussolini and Hitler and different fascist governments throughout history. Also, a lot of monarchies can be command economies as well. So a lot of times it goes hand in hand with a more authoritarian government because essentially they want to control like how resources are dictated or resources are spent in the society. It doesn't necessarily have to go that way, but a lot of times they go hand in hand. So again, I want to reiterate, a command economy is where the government makes these big decisions. And they decide how much is produced and what's produced and who's going to get it, all those different things, the price it's going to be sold for. So I want you guys to think of the positives and the negatives of a command economy. So please pause the video again. Try and come up with 5 positives and 5 negatives of a command economy. Okay, so taking a look at a command economy, we're just going to talk about, let's say, the major positives and the major negatives. So the major positives is that essentially you're not going to be as wasteful potentially as in a demand economy. You could be wasteful, but you're going to essentially try and, a lot of times command economies are going to put their resources into what they see as best for the country, not necessarily what the people desire. So you could look at that as a big positive because it's going to help some of these countries to become world powers in history. So like the Soviet Union becomes a world power through a lot of their command economic ideas. It also leads to the collapse of the country, years later from too much centralized planning, but it's part of like what vaults them into world power status. So like that's a potential positive of using the command economy. Negatives, so you want to think like in command economies, consumer goods are very limited in command economies. They don't allocate a lot of resources towards consumer driven and choice within consumer products. So you're not going to see various different types of clothing, various different types of consumer based products. Really what you're going to see is money usually funneled into like major industries, so like coal, oil, steel, like big industries that are going to help the country. A lot of money funneled into the military. So again, you want to at least try and have like 5 positives, 5 negatives. All right, the last one we're just going to take a look at briefly is the traditional economy. So the traditional economy, in this type of economy, really decisions are made by, as the name suggests, tradition. So a lot of these are much more like subsistence-based societies. A lot of them are agricultural-based. And really like you get your job from like what your parents and your ancestors, you would kind of inherit the job. And so like there's still a lot of economic systems in the world that are traditional, that are kind of more subsistence based. They're not really kind of dictated by the government. It's more kind of dictated by just like survival and trying to grow what's necessary to survive. So a lot of them, like I said, are agricultural based societies. So same thing I want you guys to do. There's a mistake here. It shouldn't say command economy. It should say traditional economy. But like, what are some positive and negatives of a traditional economy? Try to come up with some five examples. What you're going to be doing as far as your activity is concerned, or like your evaluation, I'm going to ask you to kind of weigh in on like which economic system you think potentially is the best type of economy. And you want to keep in mind, we're going to talk about this much more in the next screencast, but America is a mixed economy. So we have some elements of the market economy, mostly market economy, but we also have some elements of the command economy. So we have more of a mixed economic system as a country. Okay.